Hello, welcome to the Northern Indiana Grazing Conference breakout session. This presentation is going to explore the relationship that the district has produced with them and the Amish community in their county. The presentations today are being presented by Martin Franke, the district manager of the LaGrange Soil and Water Conservation District, and with him is Jennifer Walker, the district conservationist. Following that, Martin and another gentleman, Mike Holcomb, will be talking about the work that they have done within the county. Mike is a long-term resident and been heavily involved in conservation in many different forms through his lifetime. After that, we will actually visit two of the operations within the county. The first one, Jerry Lehman, has a 45-head dairy farm, and the second, Monroe Raber, is a part-time farmer while he works full-time within the RV industry in the area. And then doing cleanup will be Dennis Wolheter. He is a long-time regenerative farmer, has been practicing no-till since the 1970s. I want to remind you that if you have any questions, all of the speakers are on chat. And so during the presentation, you can type your questions in there and they will be able to answer them for you as the presentation is playing. Please enjoy this presentation and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
We are going to begin by introducing you to LaGrange County, Indiana, and to the Amish community who live there.
LaGrange County is located in northeastern Indiana, the second county west of the Ohio state line, and is bordered by Michigan state line to the north. The county is rectangular, 16 miles north to south and 24 miles east to west. It contains 245,760 acres and 74 natural lakes of mostly small to medium size. Land use in the county is largely agricultural. Soils heavily influenced by glacial activity tend to be light and on the sandy side. LaGrange County is the only Indiana county contained wholly within the 3 million acre St. Joe River basin draining to Lake Michigan. Surface and groundwater is plentiful. The county's 4 watersheds all enter the St. Joseph River outside county lines. These include the North Branch of Elkhart River to the south, the Little Elkhart River in the southwest, the Pigeon River running through the county center, and the Fawn River along Michigan border to the north. LaGrange County's population is close to 39,000 people. This population is largely rural. Around 2,900 people, or 7% of the total, live in the county seat of LaGrange. This is located at the approximate geographic center of the county. 3 other incorporated communities, including Topeka, Shipshewana, and Wolcottville, are also located within the county, as well as a few smaller population centers such as Ballantyne, Woodruff, Ontario, Howe, and Brighton.
Indiana as a state was settled by European immigrants moving into the state from Kentucky. This process took place starting around the time of the American Revolution in the 18th century. Therefore, the last part of the state to be settled was the north. LaGrange County does not appear to have been heavily populated by Native Americans. Some settlements of the Potawatomi tribe were located around present-day Monroe in the east and Shipshewana in the west. The first recorded European settlers in the county settled here in the late 1820s. In 1841, 4 Amish Mennonite families moved to western LaGrange County from Somerset, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio. Both the Amish and the Mennonites are spiritual descendants of the Anabaptist movement in Reformation Germany, Switzerland, and Holland. Over the last 500 years, This denomination has experienced several schisms over doctrinal and lifestyle issues within the church. The Old Order Amish are amongst the most conservative of the Anabaptist groups in existence today. At present, Old Order Amish church members number over 15,000 in LaGrange County, just about 40% of the total population of the county.
The Amish in LaGrange County are part of the third largest Amish settlement in the world. Like Martin said, the Amish make up 40% of our county's population. But in terms of land control and ownership, that percentage grows larger still. To work with our Amish neighbors from a conservation perspective, one needs to understand their culture, lifestyle, and worldview.
From their Anabaptist background, the Amish practice a strict separation from the world based on their interpretation of the admonition found in the book of Romans to be in the world, but not of it. This is manifested in dress and appearance, in the rejection of much modern technology, and in the use of Pennsylvania Dutch dialect. Population growth in the Amish community has made farmland extremely expensive and difficult to acquire. As the generations pass, large farms become small farms, and small farms fragment into rural residential holdings. As a result, many Amish families today are not full-time farmers simply because there is not room enough for that to occur. Many Amish families in LaGrange County today derive their livelihood from business pursuits like woodworking, engine and metal working shops, greenhouses, and outside employment in the RV industry. However, lifestyle is still heavily influenced by the principle of the family working together at home on the farm. The model of agrarian lifestyle is held up as the ideal in the Amish community.
Since separation from the world is important, there is a natural reluctance to participate in modern USDA Farm Bill cost share programs. At the same time, again, from a very literal interpretation of the Bible, the idea that humanity is responsible for good stewardship of the world does resonate within the Amish community. Despite Amish use of more traditional, small-scale farming methods, equipment, and practices, out of Indiana's 92 counties, LaGrange County ranks number 1 in all cattle, number 1 in total acres of pasture land, and number 1 in the number of certified organic farm operations. LaGrange County ranks near the top in the state for numbers of sheep produced, number of layer poultry and broilers, as well as the number of ducks produced. The LaGrange County SWCD, the local NRCS office, and the Amish community cooperate to promote the use of cover crops, soil health, building practices such as management of intensive rotational grazing, certified organic farming, forestry management, and even wildlife habitat management are widely accepted in our county. The Northern Indiana Grazing Conference started in 2002 to promote rotational grazing as an environmentally friendly, sustainable way to managing livestock. This has grown over the last 20 years to be one of the largest such annual grazing events in the United States. The LaGrange County District organizes and carries out 6 on-farm pasture walks a year, held May through October. These programs are excellent examples of conservation agencies cooperating with our local farm community, both Amish and non-Amish, to achieve effective conservation of our vital natural soil and water resources. We don't have things perfect yet, but we certainly are working in that direction.
Okay, as Megan said earlier, my name is Martin Franke. I'm a district manager for the LaGrange County Soil and Water Conservation District in northeastern Indiana. My original idea for this breakout session was, like the topic said, the Northern Indiana Grazing Conference, which is a partnership between our district and the local Amish community to promote rotational grazing. The conference has been in existence since 2002. Started out in that year with about 225 people in attendance. Last year we had just a few over 2,000. So it's obviously grown in the last 20 years. The more I thought about this thing, the more it sort of evolved on its own. The story of the grazing conference is not just the story of a single event that takes place on an annual basis. It's really the story of a district's relationship with a minority community in carrying out regional or area conservation concerns and doing things to improve water and soil quality in our community. So it really is it's bigger than my original intent, I guess. It's the grazing conference is a good microcosm of that, but really it's talking about a long-term relationship that has been built up over the last 20 years between the LaGrange County District and our local Amish community. So that pre-recorded introduction that you heard just a little bit ago with myself and our district conservationist was supposed to fill you in on some of the background to that. Many of you may live in communities that you're familiar with, old order or Amish communities, Amish settlements. Many of you may have those just as a tourist image in your minds from somewhere way off. There are more than 20 pretty good sized Amish communities in the United States and Canada, but they're few and far between. So you may have relationships with Amish, you may not. And this isn't, I'm trying to draw some broader conclusions with this thing and not just talk about a district and the Amish, because obviously that's going to have very limited appeal, but I'm hoping that I can draw some conclusions that would lead any district to be able to look at their minority constituency and maybe be able to relate to them a little bit better in accomplishing natural resources conservation. For my own background, I have a fairly diverse background, grew up in this part of Indiana, lived here most of my life. I have a little bit special relationship with our Amish constituents, as I grew up in a Mennonite church that I still belong to. So the Mennonites and the Amish, as you heard in the introduction, are related to each other. I don't drive a horse and buggy, don't wear a black hat. But mom was Mennonite, dad was Lutheran, Missouri Synod German Lutheran. In both cases in the mid 60s when they got married, that wasn't particularly desirable for either one of them to marry outside their own church circles. But they did it, and I guess I'm part of the result. Mom grew up in Noble County, which is the county immediately south of us here in LaGrange. Dad grew up in Allen County, which is down around Fort Wayne, about 50 miles south further than that of us. And we ended up living in LaGrange County, both parents as public school teachers. And in 1975, my father won a position with a Fulbright exchange program to teach for a year in West Germany. So spent my fourth grade year in West Germany. After getting out of college in 1987, spent another year in northwestern Ontario, Canada, teaching in an American Indian residential school, First Nations, as they're referred to today. Back then, everybody, including themselves, called themselves Indians, but things have changed since in the last 20 years. Spent 5 years in Pennsylvania after marrying my wife in her home community, and now I'm back home again since 1994. I majored in history, not natural resources. Have a BA, not a BS. So a little different there from many of my people that I work with here in the conservation world. Have some school teaching experience. I actually have 4 years experience as a museum director. And after we moved back to Indiana, have worked for private industry for quite a long time, worked for a company with that basically made and produced and distributed animal livestock feed, and also worked for about 8 years as at a lumber and a building materials company. The reason I'm giving the background, I'm trying to bore you and not trying to make a big deal out of myself, but is that I feel like my diversity in the background that I have in many different aspects has been a strength for me in being able to relate to a lot of different kinds of people. In this case, and particularly in a conservation context. Started working for the LaGrange District in 2005 as a technician and educator. Ended up after retirement and the economic reversal in the from 2008 on. Had my boss in many years, Donna Hunter, retired, and the county declined, and Indiana districts are funded primarily by the county, even though we're sort of a hybrid county state type of agency. But the counties fund us. And during that time, pretty tough times in 2012 when Donna retired. So I became district manager simply because they didn't hire anybody else. So I inherited a bunch of new responsibilities at that time. Talking about local resource conservationism and the district Amish relationship was something that Donna and Dennis Woolheader, that you'll hear from later, worked on for a long time. This was a long-term commitment. The district really started to put a lot of effort into developing a relationship with our Amish constituency 20 years ago or more. Our county, as the introduction indicated, has sandy soils, lots of surface and groundwater. We're sort of in between Lake Michigan, which isn't too far away. We're not terribly far from Lake Huron either. And so we're sort of in the top section right there underneath the Michigan mitten. And we got a lot in our community here is largely rural, agricultural land use mixed with some residential. The introduction mentioned we have 74 natural lakes, glacial lakes, which at times causes some problems with some friction, I guess, in the constituency here that we have, because a lot of our lake residents in the area come from urban areas, and they have urban expectations, which a rural community like this doesn't always meet in terms of sewage disposal and provision for water and wells and that kind of thing. The concerns that we have for maintaining soil health are largely centered around the prevention of erosion. Light sandy soils tend to wash or blow fairly easily. Water quality is a concern. We have a lot of surface water, a lot of running water, and a lot of stable water in lakes and ponds. So we have this community where you have some people here as a retirement community living on the lakes for recreational purposes. And then we have a very traditional agriculturally based community. And so we sometimes get into a little bit of headbanging between the conservationists and the environmentalists, which is obviously a little bit of a challenge for the district to deal with. The district began back in the early 1990s to try to relate, especially to our Amish community, by renting out equipment. Horse farming typically is based, of course, on very traditional practices, and that includes a moldboard plow. No-till doesn't figure largely into it. And so back in those days, the district bought a 3-row corn planter, no-till corn planter with a horse-drawn drawbar that they could rent out to sort of get the whole no-till idea some traction going here in the community. We currently started back in 01 and currently continue to rent out a couple of hydraulic post pounders with the idea that the removal of a lot of fences in the county over the last number of years, turning 20-acre fields into 100-acre fields, has opened up the area for a lot of wind erosion as well as water erosion. And without those fence rows there to provide a block to that, we're trying to make available some equipment to put some of those fences back in that not only help with the erosion situation, but also help with wildlife traffic lanes and that kind of thing as well. Rotational grazing started in LaGrange County as a fringe movement in the late 1990s. In the early 2000s, there was a local organization, sort of a cooperative between Purdue University, Michigan State, Ohio State, University of Illinois. Actually, the provincial government of Ontario was involved as well, which is how they got by with calling it the Great Lakes International Rotational Grazing Conference. I believe the last year for that event, which rotated around the area a little bit, was in 2002. In 2002, a group of Amish farmers that had gotten sort of excited about the whole concept of rotational grazing met with our then area district conservationist, Barry Bortner, and Dennis Woolheader, who you'll hear from later again, and related to him that they liked the conference, but they really wanted to see it reflect more of a grassroots nature. In other words, they wanted to hear local farmers talking about what they did that worked and what didn't work, the mistakes that they made and that kind of thing, rather than hearing academic speakers from universities talk. That has been a major key in the success of the Northern Indiana Grazing Conference. We do have occasionally university speakers. We've gotten people from Idaho. We've gotten people from the West Coast. We've had some speakers that are recognized experts in their field. I know we've had Cornell University represented upon occasion. However, the Amish community really appreciates grassroots speakers, normal everyday farmers like themselves that have tried things that either worked or that didn't. And they enjoy hearing it both ways. And I think there's value in that for a farmer to hear about somebody else's successes, but also somebody else's failures as well. The rebirth of, and by the end of, I would say by the end of the 70s or possibly through the early 80s, small dairy in LaGrange County was starting to die. And the only things that made it possible for its resurrection was the development of rotational grazing, as well as premium milk payments that came about as a result of the popularity of organic certification. LaGrange County contains about half of the certified organic operations that exist in Indiana exist in our county, and we're not a big county. Currently, just started this summer, some of the farmers started signing on to the grass-only certification. And so that's another step in the niche process, I guess. And that's really been the saving, some of the saving things that have kept the small, I would say anywhere from 20 to 50 dairy cow operations economically viable in this area. When the district relates to the Northern Indiana Grazing Conference, we do it in a number of ways. We are very careful not to call it our conference. The Northern Indiana Grazing Conference is its own entity. It has its own 501c3 status. It has its own bank account. It has a steering committee of 18 and a executive committee or planning committee of 5 that really make the major decisions. Did it? Okay, my screen went blank, I think, for a minute. Really make the major decisions. So the district provides a number of things to an Amish community that does not adopt largely modern technology. We provide the necessary technology. We've got computers, we can put together PowerPoints, we can email people, we can telephone people. The district makes a point of making sure that we can provide for our programming both the conservation the grazing conference and also our Pasture Walk programs in the summer, when you drive horse and buggy, if you go any further than 5 miles, it makes it a little bit tough, and it makes it a time-consuming process. So the district does maintain a large van, 12-passenger van, and also a minivan that we go around and pick up people for our programs and take them home again to expedite that a little bit. We provide a physical location for the grazing conference at our district office, so a place that somebody can contact for information about the conference. We provide a communication hub, and we also actually carry out the physical ownership of the district does of projection screens and overhead and PowerPoint projectors, laptop computers, copiers, printing resources, and all those kinds of things to make sure that we can do the grazing conference from year to year. So we maintain the ownership of a lot of that equipment. The development of the Pasture Walk program is really in parallel with the grazing conference. And I'm going to let Dennis talk a lot more about that than I'm going to, but I got to give credit to Dennis and to Barry Bortner, then our district conservationist back in the, I would say, mid to late 90s that developed what Pasture Walks are. And what they are is simply we get together one Thursday afternoon a month and walk someone's farm. We look at the forages that they plant. We look at the way that they have their fences installed. We look at how they rotate their paddocks. We look at their watering systems. We look at their milk house and milking parlor and all the arrangements, everything that's connected with the way that they run their operation. It works as long as we got farmers that are willing to open their places to others and share that in that way. And that's been a great advancement. It's inspired a lot of young Amish farmers to get into dairy and to get into other kinds of rotational grazing as well, because we have rotational swine, we've got rotational poultry, we've got rotation where sheep is getting to be a big deal in the last 2 years. So it's really put an impetus behind young people getting into farming when I would say 10, 15 years ago, they were getting into going to the RV factories, which is extremely lucrative in this area, and it's a hard thing to compete against. So we developed local financial management support groups. We issue a newsletter, the district does. We go to all our pasture walks and we take meticulous notes and write sort of a blow-by-blow account of each pasture walk and send that out, and people actually do read it because they're interested in what's going on. I think a key to good conservation in any community lies within ourselves as districts. And I know places, unfortunately, that this is not the case. And I realize I'm talking to a national audience. And so I don't want to make this just about Indiana, but I know that there are districts that get along well with their local NRCS office. I know that unfortunately is not the case in some places as well. But our district has always maintained very good communications and very good relationships with NRCS and FSA, Indiana State Department of Agriculture, Indiana Department of Environmental Management, our local DNR, state DNR, local private organizations like Pheasants Forever, Nature Conservancy, Acres, our university extension, which in Indiana is Purdue. As soon as you've got splits and divisions driven between those agencies, which are all there to support conservation, the public is very quick to recognize that, very quick to understand that if there's friction going on, if there's a lack of communication or cooperation, if you drive those wedges, they just get worse. So I guess I'll put that plug in that's really important to preaching a good conservation message is we as agencies have to get along ourselves before we can expect to get along with the public. To conclude my own presentation here, Understanding the dynamics of any culture is key to a palatable conservation message. In order for us to get along with our Amish constituency, we have to understand them. We've got to sympathize with them. We don't always have to agree with them. But it has, if we do disagree, it has to be a friendly disagreement. It can't be any kind of a hostile situation, and maintain a constructive relationship. However much you might start to sympathize, empathize, understand. Also, I've talked to some of the other speakers, and we've agreed. The Amish don't expect us to be Amish, and we don't expect them not to be Amish. So don't go to a pasture walk and wear a black hat and a pair of suspenders because it makes you think it might make you look, like you belong a little better. If you're acting like something you really aren't, that's going to be identifiable pretty quick. Understand that the people you work with don't expect you to imitate them. They might even be offended if you do. At the same time, there does need to be understanding and sensitivity. When we go to a pasture walk, don't wear a pair of tight shorts. That's just not considered appropriate. Don't wear what the Amish would consider to be immodest clothing. But at the same time, if a lady wears a pair of pants, she's not Amish. They're not going to expect you to wear a full-length dress. My own experience has been that I had to and from my own background, I sort of understood this anyway, but I got the lesson the hard way a few times. You have to understand things as simple as a holiday schedule. To the Amish, tomorrow is the 6th of January, which some people call Epiphany. The Amish call it Old Christmas. It's the Christmas according to the old Gregorian calendar, and they celebrate that as an additional holiday. So don't go to an Amish farm on Old Christmas thinking you're going to get the guy signed up for a cost share program. Not going to happen. Good Friday's another big day. Made the mistake one time of scheduling the district tree sale on a Good Friday. Ended up delivering all the tree orders the next week because nobody showed up on Good Friday to pick up their tree order. Ascension Day is on the Christian calendar 40 days after Easter. I went and picked up the district post pounder at an Amish farm one time to bring it back home again, and realized that I was invading in the middle of a big church gathering. And later on, the guy called me and said he really didn't appreciate me pulling the post pounder off his farm on an Ascension Day, even though it was a Thursday, because it made it look like he was farming on a holy day. So you have to be sensitive to that kind of thing. You got to understand the schedule and the priorities there, and you got to work with them. This is a process when you're working with a minority community like this. It's a long haul process. The LaGrange district did not develop this relationship with our Amish community quickly. It was made decade by decade, not day by day and not minute by minute. It's not something that happens overnight. I went with Mike Holcomb several years ago, and he's going to know who I'm talking about, to another county that was endeavoring to get a relationship going with their Amish community at some distance from here. And in the meeting that we had with them, I mentioned that, such and such took us about 15 years to get something going. And one of the district staff down there just reacted in aghast. We don't have time for that. We got to get this thing going. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to decide that this is a long-term relationship. You're not going to get instant results. So I think that's important to understand too. The most important thing that I can conclude with is that we work with Amish. I don't know who your district works with, but everyone is people. And cultures and norms and expectations are all different. All of those things have to be taken into account. But the commonality is we're all people. And at bottom line, we all work about the same way. And all of us are imperfect. Nobody's perfect. Our districts aren't perfect. We as individuals aren't perfect. And we can't expect anybody to be that way if we're not that way ourselves. So I guess the last thing I have to say today before we go into Mike's part of the program is in building relationships with your community to accomplish conservation, don't give in to frustration and blow in minutes what it takes decades to build. Okay, now that I guess I've climbed down off my stump, I would like to talk to Mike Holcomb a little bit. Meg gave him a little bit of an introduction. At first, Mike worked for the Indiana DNR in this area for quite a few years. Retired several years ago, has served as on our SWCD Board of Supervisors at one time, and I'll let him give a little bit more introduction of himself as well, because I'm sure he knows himself better than either Meg or I know him. So, Mike, you've been introduced at least twice now, and what did we miss?
Well, I think through your introductions, you've got most of what I have done, but I can just reiterate that I worked for the Department of Natural Resources for the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and I was in the division for 27 years or thereabouts. From there, I was the assistant manager at the property when I retired, and completed my retirement there from the Fish and Wildlife area. In the past, I've also been a supervisor for the Soil and Water District, which you mentioned just shortly ago. I think I was 9 years for that position. And from there, I went on to learn through the leadership, actually the Cornerstone of Leadership program put on through the Purdue Extension, I think it was, and completed a certificate of completion through that. And I also was Habitat Chairman for the LaGrange County Chapter of Pheasants Forever for 20 plus years. And currently I'm a member of the United Methodist Church of Helmer, Indiana, and a trustee.
Can you explain to me a little bit the Pigeon River Fish and Game area? If I remember right, that's about 13,500 acres. Is that correct?
That's close. I mean, when I was there, it was around 12,005. I believe it has expanded a little since then. So that's pretty close to what it was.
And it exists in mostly LaGrange County, but a couple hundred acres in Steuben County to our east.
It's western or eastern LaGrange County and western Steuben County, and most of it lies in eastern LaGrange County.
So that's it's an area that's open seasonally for hunting and fishing activities.
That's
correct?
That's correct. And then also it's open for other activities year round, and there's no motorized vehicles on the property whatsoever, no horses or anything like that. But people are welcome to use the property for walking, hiking, fishing, hunting, whatever seasons are open and available.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you help to manage that and develop the habitat on it and all that kind of thing. I'm assuming since that's pretty hunting related that you're into a little bit of hunting yourself.
Yeah, that was probably the main reason I even got involved with the department, was because of my drive to go hunting. And then we had the blizzard of '78 wiped out most of our birds and a lot of our small game. And I became very interested in pheasant hunting and bringing the pheasants back in the northern part of Indiana. And so while I was at the department, a lot of the things that we did at the Fish and Wildlife area in Pigeon River had to deal with habitat management for small game, and in particular game birds.
Okay. In Indiana, soil and water conservation districts, and I know in other states they're sometimes called other things besides that, but in Indiana, in many communities, they're sort of an old farmers club. I'm not saying that's necessarily good or bad, but your involvement in the LaGrange County District coming from DNR and wildlife habitat management really don't fit that mold. What special perspective do you think you brought to LaGrange County District as a board supervisor that represents something different than traditional agricultural involvement?
Well, that's an interesting question because when I first started, I was an associate member, which I was for 2 or 3 years before I was put on the board as a supervisor. And what I discovered was that we really weren't that far apart in what the conservation efforts that we wanted to do. We just did things differently. I don't think that working with the other supervisors, who were a lot of them or most of them were large farmers, I don't think I changed anybody's opinion, but and they didn't change mine on what we did things. But we did have several, or at least a couple supervisors that did do some management of wildlife habitat through some NRCS programs, and we were able to help with that through my Pheasants Forever group.
Mhm. Well, maybe you covered this already, but um, could you expand a little bit? You mentioned you're a little bit of a hunter. I think pheasants, birds, you train dogs, if I'm not mistaken. Bred dogs for a while too, right?
Correct. After I got started with the department, I got really interested in bringing the game birds back to in Northern Indiana after our terrible blizzard of '78. And it took a good time to get those birds back. But in the late '80s, mid '90s, we had the pheasants back to a population that was very viable. And I started hunting with Labrador retrievers and got involved with Pheasants Forever and started working through them in the late '90s, actually. Spent 20 plus years working them and trying to promote private land habitat throughout, not just in LaGrange County, but throughout Northeast Indiana. We worked in all the counties surrounding LaGrange County also.
Mhm. So working for DNR and also as a habitat development expert for Pheasants Forever, um, what particularly were you interested in, or what was your passion related to habitat development? What did you do?
Mainly what we were interested in was developing warm season grasses. We found that the native warm season grasses were what was needed to provide the habitat through the winter time for most of the game birds, which is when they really struggle. So I became, I guess, an expert, I guess you would say, in identifying both warm and cool season grasses so that we could go out to a landowner or even on the fish and wildlife property, planted probably around 1,000 acres of grasses for the fish and wildlife area, and probably somewhere near that amount for Pheasants Forever on private land throughout the 20 years that I worked for Pheasants Forever.
It's probably most people's image of Northern Indiana, especially Northeastern Indiana, is traditionally a Maple Beach forest. Um, Actually, you might be surprised to learn that as far east as LaGrange County, we have a number of areas that were natural prairie lands. Is that correct?
Yeah, and
So,
there's still areas that are just normal natural prairie, and we've been able to bring those back with the use of fire and some chemical use of invasive species that shouldn't be there in the first place.
mhm. You mentioned that you mentioned to me at least that you had developed quite a bit of respect for your fellow supervisors. Of course, a lot of them were traditional grain farmers. Um, Coming from them coming from an agricultural background, you coming from a wildlife background, um, you think you changed their ideas, they changed yours any? You sort of went there a little bit already, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think we really changed any ideas. We all had our own opinions, and sometimes they matched, and sometimes they didn't. But think in the whole end of things that they understood where I was coming from. I understood where they were coming from,
Mhm.
and we really didn't have any battles, so to speak, while I was a supervisor about whether we should do anything differently. I know as a supervisor, I continued to support tree planting that the district had. And then we started doing warm season grass plantings through NRCS programs, and the district supported us in those kind of programs.
You mentioned being involved in the Cornerstone of Leadership program, which was a program developed for Soil and Water Conservation District board members in Indiana by Purdue University. Oh, what, 15 years ago or so, probably
Yeah,
to begin with.
probably.
Um, that seems to have impressed you. How did participating in that program help you become a more effective conservation leader in this community?
Well, one of the first things that they do in that program is to figure out your personality. So they give you the Briggs-Meyer test. And I found out a lot about myself. Some I already knew and some I didn't want to admit, I guess. But what it really brought forth in the end with the graduation of the certificate was how important our community leaders are and how important it is for the Soil and Water District people to be involved with community leaders.
Okay. I mentioned that in my presentation a little bit before too. I don't know how other states operate, but in Indiana, soil and water conservation districts were formed by an act of state legislature, and yet they were never included as a state agency. They've always been considered county agencies, therefore largely county funded. So like you mentioned, Mike, it's very important for us to work with our local government officials because that's the side our bread is buttered on, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I can remember when I first was on the board was still working with Donna Hunter, who you mentioned earlier, and going to county council meetings during the budget time and going to the commissioner meetings during the budget time and getting to know those people and getting to know the process that they use to help fund the Soil and Water District. And that was all come through fruition through, going to the Cornerstone Leadership Program and knowing that it is important to be a part of that solution or that process.
So in Indiana, we talk a lot about the Indiana Conservation Partnership, or the ICP. And I could start reeling off acronyms here: USDA, NRCS, FSA, NRCD, Great Lakes Commission, EPA, DNR, IDEM, ISWCD, ISDA, Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited. Any insights you would like to talk about the importance of all these various conservation partnerships, private and public?
Well, I think the main thing to take from all that is that they're all in on conservation. They all look at it from a different angle. They've all got their reasons why they're in it, but in the end, it's all for the good of conservation. And a lot of times when you can get one project going, you can get a 2 or 3 partnership going with it, it just makes it go so much easier and more complete in the end. And it does more than just one goal. There might be 3 or 4 goals that are met all with one program.
After a while, you retired from state service and started working for a conservation consultant, indirectly working with the district, not directly working with the district, but doing a lot of work that the district wrote grants toward funding, a lot of cost share type activity. And we're going to hear from Dennis Woolheader later, but you want to describe that a little bit?
Yeah, when I retired from the DNR in 2009, I went to work immediately for a company called Sustainable Natural Resource Technologies, or SNRT for short. And we started working through the LaGrange County Soil and Water District to implement grants in basically the western side of the county, a Little Elkhart watershed. We did do some grant in the Pigeon River watershed, the north branch of the Elkhart, and then also the last one I worked on was the Fawn River watershed.
Okay. A lot of engineered practices.
And yes, and that's something that I was involved in the minor end of it as far as fencing projects and things like that, because I didn't have the expertise to do the larger projects. But when we did need engineering projects, NRCS was a great help. Their tech team from Albion came up, and boy, without question, if we had a project, they were there, and they were there to help design the program, design the project. It didn't cost the landowner anything to have that done, and then it was our job to make sure it got implemented and paid for.
Okay. The overall theme, I guess, to conclude our session today, Mike, is our district's relationship with our local Amish community in that last part that you were talking about, working as a watershed technician, sort of selling the program, representing the program, getting the design work done, even if you didn't do it yourself, and then making sure that those practices were fully implemented afterwards. You work with a lot of Amish clients, am I correct?
Yes, very much, mostly Amish. And what I found going into it, and Dennis Woolheader had already laid the format for me, was that what we needed to do was to get in and meet the community leaders. As you had spoken earlier, I think you said something about they didn't always see to our way as far as doing things. And so my goal was to come in and be as not a replacement for Dennis, but to take over for him in a way that was, pretty cohesive. And I think I was able to do that because we were able to continue the grants and get things done. But the key was to meet the community leaders and to get them on board with the ideas of why we were doing things, why it was good for the community, why it was good for the environment. And I think once that happened, the community leaders understood that, yeah, this is a good thing, and then they needed to participate. And then the word got out through the Amish grapevine that this was a good thing.
Big part of the process was convincing people it wasn't welfare, right?
Pretty much, yeah. They're pretty much not going to want to do anything that's government related as far as funding.
Not a handout.
No, hand up.
A hand up. That's a good way of putting it. Anything else you'd like to end with, Mike?
Just mention that maybe over the course of the years that Dennis and I worked together on the grants, we were able to spend or put in the community $2.3 million in grant money that went to the local community and hopefully went to some good in the environment and conservation at the same time.
So you're talking about a period, if I recall, from about 2009 to the present.
Correct. Yeah, I just completed my work with SNRT back in August.
Okay.
And that's pretty much the wrap.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate your input in this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Lehman, and I'm a farmer and lives in LaGrange County, Indiana, and I'm married to Loretta, and we have 8 children together, while 1 is married and 2 have jobs off the farm, and the rest are at home helping out with the farm. We have a 45 cow Holstein dairy herd on a 125 acre farm, along with 27 acres of woods area. I am the 4th generation on the farm, where I moved on to when I married in 1998. The farm was certified organic in 2014, and I just got it certified as 100% grass-fed dairy here in 2020 here. My involvement with Soil Water Conservation District, we in 2012 I have the Little Elkhart River going through my property back in the wood, some of the permanent pasture area and some of the woods area there, and my cows they could get into the creek wherever they wanted to, and whenever I send them back for shade and pasture, they kind of made their own path down to the creek, so it was worn down paths here and there, and to help with to keep the banks in shape and everything, I looked into cost share, and I worked with Mike Holcomb. He came out and looked at the river and my crossing. I didn't have a good crossing point to get on the other side of the creek for equipment and the cows to get through consistently. So they came out and looked at it, and they drew up a plan on what and how things have to be done in order to qualify for cost shares that they offered to us. And I liked the idea, so we went ahead and we built the crossing. They dug out some of the gravel at the creek, from the creek, and then added a very solid base of limestone. And so now I have it fixed up with a limestone and then a floodgate with hanging chains of hot wire on both sides. It's probably between close to 15, 20 feet wide. And it has worked very well. And I fenced off the other part of the creek to hold the livestock off, so that they cannot just enter into the creek however and whenever they want. But it's more of they still do go, sometimes I strip graze parts of the creek, but they're in there for a limited time. And the crossing works well because the limestone base is a solid base, and it's okay to walk through, but it's not comfortable to stand in for a long period of time. So they use it more as a crossing. And the way it's sloped and everything, it's sloped to help with so that the water stays out of the creek as much as possible. And it's very well sloped when you go with equipment. If you want to go across the creek with equipment, it works very well. So the crossing, like I said, was done in 2012, and he helped me. I built the fence, not just the crossing alone, but the length of the property was involved in the creek. Don't know for sure the length. I'd say maybe 1,000 feet, or between 1,000 and 2,000 feet of fence, and then on both sides, and they made it wide enough to keep so that the banks will hold it. And I used their post pounder that they have. I used the post pounder to do it, and they allowed me to figure in my time to build it. So it was and then still paid another, and they helped with the cost shares, I think 75% of the material. So it worked well, and I enjoy, after 8 years of using it, the crossing and the fence, it works well on our farm. And I was also asked to speak a little bit on my part and role in the steering on the Northern Indiana Grazing Conference. I'm involved there with the planning committee and the steering committee to plan the conference there. The first conference, when that all started, how it all got started was back in 2002. The first conference was held with 275 registered participants and maybe a dozen exhibitors. And it has grown to, last year, we had a little over 2,000 people there for the two-day event. It was a two-day event, and that is including exhibitors as far as people there. A two-day deal. The steering committee consists of, for the planning committee and the steering committee of the grazing conference, consists of 20 local farmers that do practice grazing, are involved with grazing practices. The steering committee will meet 2 times a year to discuss what the meeting, the conference, and plans for the next one. And we have, out of that 20, we have a 5-man planning committee, and they will come together probably up to 6 times a year, along with some farm tours to do speakers. And this 5-man planning committee rotates. We have always one man coming off out of the 5-man. Every year we rotate one, and another one out of the 20 beat committee will be voted back onto the 5-man. And the 5-man committee will kind of they make the final decisions on schedules and picking out speakers. And Soil and Water Conservation District, Purdue Extension, and the NRCS help out as advisory members. So they are involved with with the Soil and Water, the LaGrange County Soil and Water Conservation District. They help quite a bit with the planning of this conference, with necessary planning, not planting, scheduling, phone calls, and registration process. They help with the sound system and the PowerPoint presentations. They attend most of the meetings and they take minutes and send them back to us to look at, which helps us quite a bit on the planning stages. They also do the taxi work for us to get us all together in meetings, and when we do farm tours for farmer panel speakers. We see a very positive impact and help that they do for us to make this a successful event. I call it, for myself, what I get out of the grazing conference, I call it the Northern Indiana Farmers Revival Meeting. My first years of farming, I thought I had to pay to get in a conference. I will not go. That did not strike me. But it so happened that we stopped in one time, and I seen the setup, and I thought I'm going to try it next year. And I enjoyed the event very much and have attended ever since, if at all possible. And it's a lot of ideas are shared, and not all new idea. Sometimes we come home from the conference and we don't necessarily have a brand new idea that's going to work on the farm. But it's not always that we need to pick up new ideas, but it's the positive attitude you can feel when you're at the conference, and just the fellowship of farmers being together and sharing ideas has a huge impact. What it does for our community. And one other positive about the conference is that sometimes we bring speakers in from outside of our community, and that has helped us get us out of our own box of our way of doing things. Sometimes somebody else comes in out of another community and he has tried something that nobody in our community has ever tried, and yet it works. But you have to be careful with some of those ideas that you don't overdo it, because sometimes they're in a different atmosphere and different settings. But other times you need that encouragement from somebody that does work, and you try it and it works well. So it's a mix of, and along with that, it's always a mix of our own local people sharing ideas. And there's not just one way of farming, and there's different ways of doing it. Farming is a continuous learning from others and experimenting with things that work and fit your lifestyle. Finding the right mix of work to fit your lifestyle to keep the farm or make the farm in better shape than it was when we started. And always strive to improve our soil health and water quality.
Hi, I'm Monroe Raber. My wife Naomi and I have been married for 45 years. We got 4 adult children and 9 grandchildren. I lived all my life in LaGrange County, Eden Township. I've been an RV production worker and part-time farmer during those years. We like to hunt and fish and spend time doing cookouts at our cabin in the woods. I've been involved with LaGrange County Soil and Water since 2007. Initially, I was a member of a watershed committee that was tasked with cleaning up an impaired watershed, which was for the most part in the western half of our county. In 2011, I was asked to join the Board of Supervisors to get started up cleaning our watershed. Mike Holcomb and myself would go and meet with community leaders and explain what funds are available. We also had meetings with groups of landowners in the evenings. Eventually, as more farmers signed up for these programs, it seemed to kind of have a snowball effect. After these projects were completed, the EPA wanted to do some follow-up testing on one project in every state. The first watershed that we worked on was a 33,000 acre project. This was the project the EPA picked to do some follow-up testing. I constructed 2 3-foot by 3-foot weatherproof boxes to house equipment to monitor follow-up testing. The boxes contained 12 plastic bottles mounted on a carousel powered by a nearby solar panel. The bottles would get filled by a PVC pipe running to a drainage ditch. After the bottles got filled, SWCD would get a call from these boxes, so a new set of bottles were exchanged. The data collected from these boxes showed a significant improvement in water quality. The information from these follow-up test sites was then made available to be accessed with other SWCDs. Another project I've been involved with is our annual Arbor Day program at Pargill. Eventually, we started having annual forestry field days, usually around the end of April. We also have a tree sale every spring, which has been very well received. A tree sales brochure is distributed throughout our community well ahead of the deadline to order trees. A good variety of hardwoods, evergreens, pines, and some ornamentals are offered at a very economical cost. We've also started offering some fruit trees. When we have our forestry field day, we often have two hosts that are in close proximity to each other. We normally have a forester and someone from the DNR as our speakers. Our district NRCS specialist also talks about programs that have funding available for forestry improvement projects. In the morning, we meet at one of the hosts for coffee and rolls while the speakers start their presentations. There's a time for question and answers afterwards. After the morning session, we go to the woods for a more hands-on experience. After arriving at the woods, we usually break up into two groups. The forester will go with one group, and the person from the DNR will go with the other group. All kinds of forestry-related questions are asked during these walks. Something that I've been promoting in our area, and the foresters also have, is to fence livestock out of woodlots. Overall, woodlot owners in our area are doing a better job of keeping livestock out. My wife and I were able to buy 12 acres of woods adjoining our farm in the spring of '87. It was a woods that hadn't been managed very intensively. The woods consisted of a wide variety of species, including beech, apple, sycamore, walnut, black cherry, soft maple, sugar maple, basswood, poplar, chinkapin oak, white oak, red oak, swamp white oak, bitternut hickory, shagbark hickory, American elm, pawpaw, and some more low-end species that we try to get rid of. The first order of business after buying the woods was to build a fence to keep the livestock out. In the late summer of the first year, we did a timber harvest to remove the low-value species, which for the most part was beech, so more valuable species could thrive. There has been a major transformation in our woods during the 33 years we've owned it. The woods has paid for itself through proper management and timely timber harvests. 9 years after the first harvest, we did a second harvest, which also consisted mostly of low-grade timber. 12 years after the second harvest, we did another timber sale, of which a substantial portion graded veneer. After the second harvest, we established a series of trails that we maintained for hunting, hiking, firewood removal, etc.
Good morning. I hope each of you have had a good night's rest wherever you might be. I am Dennis Woolheader. I was raised in LaGrange County, Indiana, and Northeast Indiana, up next to the Michigan line. I lived on a farm, and I've lived on a farm most of my life, except a few years in which I was teaching. My wife, Bonita, and I have been married 57 years. We have 3 sons, 8 grandsons, 2 granddaughters, and 2 great-grandchildren, with another on the way, I'm told. I was involved in 4-H and FFA during my school years, and I had planned to farm the rest of my life, but a year after high school, because of the influence of my vocational ag teacher, and I liked very well, I went to Purdue and majored in agricultural education. I taught vocational agriculture and science and was FFA advisor. In 1971, my wife and I decided to move back to the farm. Our crop rotation was corn and soybeans, along with some alfalfa, orchard grass, and winter wheat. I sold the hay and the straw mainly through 2 auctions, Topeka and Shipshewana, Indiana, which was right in the center of the Amish community. I also sold hay privately, and during those early years, I sold feed, which my territory was mostly in the Amish community. I served as soil and water supervisor for the LaGrange County for 15 years, got involved in also the area and the state associations. In 1999, we decided to cut back on our involvement in the farm, and we turned it over to our oldest son, who had been farming on his own, and actually we'd been farming some together. 16 years ago, in a discussion with an old retired preacher who was a farm boy from Missouri, he shared with me that there was two things which hurt our society. One was TV. And of course, I know we all have TV, or most of us do. It keeps us inside more instead of being outside. It keeps us from doing some things that, like reading a good book and so on. But the biggest thing, how it's changed our minds. If you look at the early programs and the programs and the things they show on TV, it has really changed our thinking. The other thing took me by surprise. He said air conditioning. He said in the days before air conditioning, in the summertime, the houses would get too hot. So in the evenings, you'd go out and sit on the porch or under a shade tree. Your neighbors did the same thing. You might go visit neighbors and you'd visit with your neighbors up and down the street. My wife said it was raised in Fort Wayne. In her younger years, her parents knew about everybody on their city block. The Amish in Elkhart and LaGrange County constitutes the third largest Amish population in the United States, close behind the Lancaster area in Pennsylvania and Holmes County area in north central Ohio, which is considered the largest Amish population. The Amish call the non-Amish English, so I'll be using the terms Amish and English. They have no line electricity or no electricity from the public service companies, so therefore they don't have TV and air conditioning. In the evenings, you often see them driving around the community. You often see them sitting under a shade tree or on a porch, maybe a buggy or two there with the neighbors who have come to visit, or you may see Amish couple or Amish family walking down the road to visit their neighbors. Another thing that they do different than us, when they get married, their wives normally do not work away from home, especially after they start having children. They also farm with horses, even though they're a little more modern than they used to be, like have engines on hay mower conditioners, their corn pickers and their hay balers. They still pull the equipment around through the field with the horses. They travel with horse and buggy. They go about 7 miles in an hour, and that depends on the weather. So if they're going much further away than that, they'll hire English drivers to haul them. They don't work on Sundays or 4 different holidays throughout the year. Sunday is their Sabbath day. The 4 holidays, 2 we just went through Christmas, and January the 6th, which is the 12th day of Christmas, that they call the Old Christmas, and also Good Friday and Ascension Day, in which 40 days after Easter, Christ ascended into heaven. And that always falls on a Thursday. There's a lot of housing manufacturing in LaGrange and Elkhart County, like motor homes and modular homes and recreational vehicles, because of the work ethic of the Amish. And those holidays, the production line does not work because the majority of the production line is Amish. Also, they do not vote, which I think every American citizen should vote. Also has been mentioned, they're leery of government programs and reluctant to take cost share. In LaGrange County, as they can constitute 40% of our population and are major landowners, engaging the Amish in conservation cost share in our county is very important for beneficial to our soil and water quality. LaGrange County has the second largest dairy producer in the state and is #1 in all cattle. That includes dairy and beef. And you can see how that would impact their practice impact our soil and water quality. In the 80s and early 90s was a rough time for farmers, which some of you remember and some won't. High production cost, high interest rates. I can remember of paying up to 21%. Can you imagine that for an operating loan? And also low commodity prices. I just read recently in a magazine where 15% of the farmers went out of business during that time. Now just think about it. That's 1 out of every 7. As the dairy farmers were looking to cut costs and increase production through extension service and also some livestock magazines, and one I can think of would be Graze magazine. And so rotational grazing come into practice. Rotational grazing is where you divide your pasture into smaller areas. We call them paddocks. The cows rotate from one pasture area to another. Some of the pasture mixes, the one that provides the most energy and the most protein per pound of dry matter is perennial ryegrass. But perennial ryegrass tends to shut down in real hot weather and when it's really dry. So alfalfa, orchard grass, and other pasture mixes are involved in the rotation. You turn the livestock in when the grass is about 8 inches high and let them eat it down to about 4 inches. This allows for faster regrowth. And the rule of thumb is you take half and leave half. And then when the first paddock becomes ready to pasture, you rotate your cows back to that one and make the rest that you didn't get pastured into hay for winter feed. The dairy uses more intensive rotational grazing system in which they rotate maybe every day or between every milking. And this takes a little more management. We normally use a brake wire, which is either a wheel or step-in post, and give them so much every time you move it. And that also requires that you have a water source back in the field. We use poly wire, which has strands of stainless steel wire woven in it, so it will carry a charge for the fence charger. This provides young, succulent, nutritious, palatable feed, increased forage production. The animals spread their own manure. Soil health improves, and in our area, there's a lot of sandy loam, so the organic matter content is fairly low, and I've heard where the organic matter has increased a little bit because of the pasture. Also improved herd health. Also during this time, the LaGrange County SWCD was getting more involved with the Amish, so they purchased a 15-passenger van, and Pasture Walks began to start. It started out with small groups, both English and Amish, 2 or 3 neighbors getting together and discussing how they're going to do some of this. And in the early 90s, the Extension Service conducted a pasture walk on a Amish farm. And then soon after that, the SWCD and NRCS picked up conducting pasture walks, and they had the van to carry the Amish to, haul Amish to those. When I came on board in 1999, I was asked to conduct the pasture walks. Usually the pasture walks, we schedule May through October, 6 a year, one a month, but we have had some in April and also later in the fall. The way we conduct our pasture walks, we usually have an aerial photo with the fields marked out and the date the pasture was seeded and what the pasture mix. And then these was passed out at the pasture walk. The host would discuss his family and explain the farming operation, and then we'd go from field to field. And we'd stop at each field. The host would talk a little bit about it. He may ask people questions for situations he has, or people would ask him. This usually took an hour to an hour and a half. Then we'd come back up to the farmstead, and I would have brought a cooler with soda pop and water. And the best thing was, while we were gone, or maybe in the morning, some of the women were baking homemade cinnamon rolls. And it weren't these, it was these nice big ones. And boy, is that a way to cap off a pasture walk. And then usually the attendance would vary anywhere from a handful up to over 50. And I've heard since that it's been over 75 sometimes. But the one I could think of that only had a handful was, it had been a wet season to make hay, and that particular week was ideal for haymaking. So most people were making hay. Then I'd take the Amish home, and that was a chance for me to talk to them on one-on-one. Our county had a lot of, several counties had a lot of livestock in ditches. In fact, LaGrange County has 74 lakes and countless wetlands. There are lots of water running through it and lots of places for the pollutants to go, and a lot of ditches to taking places. And so you can imagine that there was complaints from people driving down the road seeing livestock in the ditches. So IDEM, which is Indiana Department of Environmental Management, became involved. We had an employee in the office that did a wonderful job with youth education, and she'd taken some grant writing classes. And so she became very proficient in writing grants. And a grant was written for a 319 water quality grant. And that included the St. Joe River Basin watershed that flowed into Lake Michigan on the Indiana side. And that included all or parts of 6 counties. We also formed a steering committee with NRCS and SWCD employee from each of the counties. We cost shared 75% and 50% on some of the practices. We did pasture plans, nutrient management plans, cost shared 75%, 50%, like filter strips along ditches, fencing along ditches, rotational grazing plans, cost shared on seeding pastures for the poly wire and the fence posts to make those work, water lines. And as you've seen from Jerry Lehman's presentation, some livestock crossings. We conducted 2 manure management seminars through the grant, held them at restaurants that was familiar with both the Amish and the English. Between the 2, we had over 130 attendants, more Amish and English. They paid a small fee, learned a lot from a variety of speakers, and enjoyed a good meal. It cannot be emphasized enough that free money is not the way to sell Amish. The challenge to us was to help them see that cost share is not just for them, but to improve water quality for others. We allowed the Amish clients over time to come to the conclusion that sits well with their priorities and values. It played a role in the development of Amish neighbors' trust in our district as a resource and not a policing agency. and we'll all benefit greatly from it. And I want to emphasize that it took the cooperation of all of us in all the counties and all our clients to make this work. And I feel that LaGrange County and the St. Joe watershed is a better place now than it was 25 years ago. Thank you.
Well, thank you to everyone for such an interesting presentation. It's interesting to hear what people are doing to reach out to the minority populations within their districts. This is now the end of this presentation. If you go back to the agenda, you can pick out the next session that you want to listen to. We appreciate you joining us today and hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.